Interesting. Type pre-state. What were we any instructor evil story in several states to the FBI. He told me that it was a fine lead work. And I told him stories of the FBI, which are dead. The FBI asked the questions, that they're familiar with some of the perpetrators I identified, maybe every reasons believe they would respond. That failure, that's a moment of law enforcement refused to take action, some of the investigative injustice, and bring repercussions to my sisters, my family, and so many others. It's me personally, including my health. The FBI's decades of gun-driven actions led to countless women girls and young women suffering abuse and trauma because of preventive. Individuals like Virginia Nikki Frank, Initiative de Georgia, Sean T. David, Brian Fisher Tony, Danny Fence, Jenna Lisa Jones, Ashley Rubright, and Jennifer Rose Williams. Each survivor represents the legends forever. Suffering that, which of them is spared if the FBI had done a job in 1996. The veteran did not stop there. In 2006, the FBI tracked me down, stating that they searched for me because they knew I was and not. They urged me to testify in a federal criminal trial against Epstein and his co-conspirators, and they promised that they would get him this time. I trusted them again, relied upon them again, and they betrayed me again. I think following through with their promises, the government offered Epstein a sweetheart to me and showed with powerful individuals to down the vote. And they persist in granting special treatment to certain people to this day. I have received death threats from that officer suicide, including one incident where they threatened to scientists. And those threats have not stopped. I have been subjected to more than 3 decades of ongoing harassment, vicious challenges to my influence, and real danger from internet instigators, trolls, and more. Meanwhile, my numerous efforts to obtain my Epstein report from the FBI have been rejected time and again. In 2023, I wrote a letter to the government asking for an investigation of the government's actions or inactions in response to my 1956 reports. The Inspector General replied, saying they were busy with other things, would get back to me if they never did. I sent multiple FOIA requests for my FBI report records. In January 2025, in response to my most recent request, the government said that they would get back to me in November of 2027. Until late, I finally received a letter saying they looked at my some kind of action and then I had was addressed. But what they did in the secret with no choice and violent and administrative claims against the government and then a lawsuit. Since then, virtually nothing has happened. And I'm not waiting wondering what is next. With the passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, I took years of efforts to get my records. And Epstein 71 form was released for the first time. Confirming it's a small part of my Epstein rights. It's just a word for it. It's anything, some of what I had studied for years. However, well, it's dead to what I told the FBI was not in that document. So the release of the Epstein Files provided them with partial paper. Where is the evidence I provided with my social school? And how did my sister Andy finally the FBI release my full report? The families of those charged protect us I'm overwhelmed. But my stomach duties has busting here again. The stress of this problem, the government hiking and refusing to turn over written confirmation of my family's report, along with the ongoing harassment and death of contributors developing serious health issues, including Hodgkin's lymphoma, a brain tumor, and recently Alzheimer's disease. In the last month, I have spent 23 nights in the hospital, including multiple nights in the ICU. Along with my health, it brought me in my career. In 1996, I was first in a graduate school working a life that I always creating itself community city. Perhaps assaulted, threatened, held down if my career was faulted. And the trajectory of my life was thrown off course. So many others that have reached out and said he's trying, and they could have been prevented. Individuals like Virginia Bright, who is the backbone of the state and remains the inspiration behind the fight, She's the reason my sister and I think more publicly so we can stand together. She faced also the relentless attacks to her grandchildren that she fought. While Virginia may no longer be physically beside us, she had been a shining star of my life and remains so today. The rest of humanity owes it to her legacy to continue this quest. We are still walking down the drill with a busy place for us. So let you be direct about what we need. The federal government gives us explanations, accountability for injuries caused, and a promise of systemic change when private children are reported. Accountability should start with the government's acknowledgement and responsibility for their repeated failures to act in response to my negative decision report. The government needs to take responsibility for endanger and injuring young women. The government needs to start telling the truth, face my lawsuits, and be held with count to me and to all others who have been harmed. Have the FBI done their job? 30 years of trying to assess abuse and trauma for them and avoid it. I've told the FBI files, including the 96 and 2006 reports, including my art. We also need the FBI and the Department of Justice to fully investigate every lead in this case. We need investigation and prosecution of everyone responsible, both men and women. To conclude the official submissions for 2008 sweetheart league, the other perpetrators, and the many of conspirators, and anyone who is correctly showing thousands of individuals from justice. No more protection for the justice. There must be no coordinating of communicating the sentence of next one. Who sexually abused me, my younger sister, for so many girls and other members, and personally threatened and killed me. Has shut government doors and has demonstrated no basis on which she believes she would ever be truthful. As the Epstein case whistleblower, I have waited 3 decades for justice. It's a miracle I'm still fighting, especially considering the stress of 3 decades of the cases done to my awesome quality. I keep fighting for justice and transparency for a better, safer future for the next year. Thank you.
And obviously, I know we don't often get to hear from this farmer and started with people who chose to address obviously us and country. I also might thank her sister, Annie Farmer, who's been an incredible advocate. She's a minor, of course, herself, and has really worked to share her story and her own story whenever possible. We're going to hear some opening remarks also from Scott and Roberts. And so I would ask them to join us here at the podium. I want to thank them also for their achievement. Thank you, Representative Garcia, and all members here today. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to be here. Obviously, wish Virginia was here to do this with us, but I will do my best to keep it together. My name is Scott Roberts, and I am the younger brother of Virginia Roberts Dufresne. I'm here today because without Virginia's courage and her story, we would not be having this conversation about, In the summer of 2000, just steps away from this courtroom at Mar-a-Lago, Virginia was pursued by convicted trafficker Elaine Maxwell. She was only 16 years old, a child who had just finished 10th grade when she began being trafficked. Before her passing, Virginia gave sworn testimony exposing us to what it truly was, a global sex trafficking operation enabled, protected, and funded by powerful people. For years, survivors have been asked the same question: who were the names? The truth is, many survivors stay silent because many of these individuals still hold power, wealth, and influence in our society. Point blank, period. That is dangerous. No survivor should have to risk their own safety just to be believed. But Virginia, she did it anyway. She stood up when others were afraid, told the truth under oath, and faced people she knew were powerful. Today, we lean on her courage once again, because she believed accountability should reach everyone involved, no matter their status or influence. And Virginia, we're here today She would say these words herself, since she cannot. I will say them for her as your little brother. And with that, I'd like to share Virginia's own words from her sworn deposition dated May 3rd, 2016. They trafficked me through many people. Okay, please name a person that Ghislaine Maxwell directed you to have sex with. Prince Andrew. Okay, who else? As a whole, they both trafficked me to many people. Okay, so can you please tell me when Ghislaine Maxwell actually had sex with another person? Glenn Duman. Who else? Well, Redacted is another one. Ghislaine Maxwell asked you to have sex with Redacted. And Glenn Dubin and Steve Kaufman were, like I said, the first people I was sent to after my training. And where does Alan Dershowitz fit to this group of people? Saying, I can't tell you piece by piece by piece who. I know Glenn Dubin was first. Okay. And I know Stephen Kaufman was one of the first that I was sent to. Alan Dershowitz could have been between there. Between Glenn and Stephen. This is only a small sample of the thousands of stories that still remain untold. But the question today is no longer whether names exist. The question is what will Congress and the Department of Justice do about it? Even if only a handful of names are publicly known, will there finally be investigations and accountability? With that, I'd like to turn it over to my wife, Amanda Ramos.
First, I want to thank this committee and Representative Garcia and everyone here who continues to fight with us for accountability, but most importantly, staying with survivors. Virginia's story was harrowing, and as we heard my husband speak, she wasn't afraid to say the names. We are talking about millions of files, sworn testimony, depositions, emails, flight records, bank records, photographs, videos, and evidence collected over decades. Evidence that points to a network, not just two people trafficked and abused over 1,200 victims, girls, children, women, and boys. Epstein and Maxwell did not act alone, and Palm Beach was the blueprint. It was the center for expansion. So when this Department of Justice says there is nothing to see here, survivors know exactly what that sounds like. A cover-up. Virginia wrote in Nobody's Girl, don't be fooled by those in Epstein's circle who said they didn't know what Epstein was doing. That sentence should guide this committee's work. Because I don't recall is not enough. When people like Les Wexner are asked about Epstein's finances and alleged connections to his network, the public deserves real answers and investigations. When Howard Lutman has given challenging accounts about his association with Epstein, that deserves scrutiny, resignations, and investigations. When former Prince Andrew denied knowing Virginia, despite evidence and testimony surrounding that encounter, that deserves scrutiny and investigation. And when acting attorney General Todd Blanche met with Ghislaine Maxwell, a convicted sex trafficker accused of perjury, and shortly after was moved to a minimum security prison, that demands answers and investigations. So today we ask for 4 things. First, Congress must hold this Department of Justice accountable, including contempt proceedings, as the record has shown that this DOJ has violated the law. Second, state investigations must continue and expand in New Mexico, New York, Florida, the Virgin Islands, and everywhere this network operated. Third, this committee must issue further subpoenas and require alleged co-conspirators, enablers, financiers, and witnesses to testify under oath. Fourth, follow the money. Financial records are not secondary. They need to be the key to exposing the full network. Suspicious payments, shell entities, possible tax violations, money laundering, and transactions connected to trafficking and abuse must be investigated aggressively because financial crimes can open the door and lead to real prosecutions. And finally, the Epstein and Maxwell investigations must be reopened, not partially, not quietly, but fully. Survivors and the public deserve the truth, and enablers must no longer hide behind wealth, power, or silence. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those words. We are going to begin and hear some opening statements from our witnesses. So I wanted to start by thanking Ms. Wiles, who's going to recognize Anna for the opening statement as well.
Hello, my name is Courtney Wild. When I was 14 years old, I was abused by Jeffrey Epstein. He abused me until I was 17 years old. What happened to me was terrible, but what happened after that by our own government changed my life just as much. I came here today to ask for one simple thing, to make sure this never happens again. I filed a case under the Crime Victims' Rights Act because government secretly made a deal with Jeffrey Epstein. They signed a non-prosecution agreement. They made the deal behind closed doors. They never told me, and they never told any of us. Instead, they sent letters telling me to be patient, even though they knew the case was already over. For years, I believed there was an investigation happening. There wasn't. When I found out the truth, I went to my lawyer, Brad Edwards. He took my case in 2008, and he fought for me against the government for over a decade. We wanted to do the right thing for all victims. Together, we wanted answers to a simple question: how could this happen? We had to fight all the way to the 11th Circuit, which took years to get the emails between the government and Jeffrey's lawyers to help us understand what happened. When we finally got them, they showed something I will never forget. The government wasn't trying to negotiate with Epstein's lawyers. It was like the government was trying to make him happy. They were trying to make sure that the punishment they were going to give them was okay with them. It seemed like they had forgotten that there were 40 of us kids who had been abused by them. I was so confused because where I come from, if you commit a crime, you go to jail. I have never heard the sense of letting you help them decide which crimes they're going to charge you with, or if you're cool with how long you're going to spend in jail. But I thought, what do I know? Maybe that's how it works for rich guys. That's how it did work for Jeffrey Epstein. Finally, after 10 years of fighting in 2019, a federal judge finally ruled that my rights and that the rights of other victims were violated by the non-prosecution agreement. But there was nothing that could be done about it. There was no remedy. I just want to say it again. I'm sorry. The court found that the government violated the law and nothing happened. That means the law of the Crime Victims' Rights Act 18 U.S.C. 3771 does not matter. And if the law has no consequences, it doesn't protect anybody. I was lucky to have a lawyer willing to fight for me for almost a decade. So a lot of victims won't find that, especially in this case where everybody made us feel like we're crazy. So I'm asking you to fix that. Please fix the Crime Victims' Rights Act so it can actually help victims in the future. I have my own ideas, and if my lawyers have more ideas, but I really hope that if nothing comes of this, we can finally get the legislation right. There needs to be a clear definition of what it means to legally confer with victims. I'm still not sure what that actually means, but I know it never happened for me. There must be real consequences and penalties in the statute that apply automatically when a court determines that a victim's rights have been violated. The answer after after years and years of litigation, cannot be nothing happens when you finally win and prove that your rights have been violated. If prosecutors choose to ignore victims, those victims' voices must be put on the record, memorialized, and preserved, especially when a deal is made behind closed doors. There needs to be attorneys' fees provision so victims can find lawyers who will stand up for them. If those changes had existed back then, maybe what had happened to me and so many others would have not happened. My case against the government for violating the rights of at least 40 of us Palm Beach kids was happening from 2008 to 2019. Do you know how many other girls Jeffrey abused in that time period? I bet the FBI knows. But the point is that Epstein continued to abuse other girls in New York, New Mexico, around the world, and even still here in Florida. Well, after he was released in 2019, or I'm sorry, in 2009, and everybody knew it. There were lawsuits. There were so many new articles. He was a registered sex offender, and still nothing was done by the government. Not until 2019 when he was finally arrested. None of those girls should have ever been abused. Jeffrey Epstein should have been in jail. If he had been in jail, like any other man who did the same thing as him, he would have been. And there wouldn't have been a single victim after 2009. But he wasn't, and he did. He abused so many girls after 2009 at the same exact time that I was asking the government why he got the deal and why they violated my rights. That is the real injustice here. That is the real thing we need to prevent it from ever happening again in this country. I was there for his bail hearing in 2019, and I spoke to the judge right in front of him about how dangerous he was. The bail was denied, and for the first time, I thought we might finally get justice. A month later, he was dead. Once again, the system failed us. Someone let him die in a secure prison, ensuring that he would never be held accountable for what he did to me as a kid. Since then, there have been prosecutions, there's been civil cases, there have been settlements, but none of that changes what was lost, and none of that fixes what was allowed to happen in the first place. We fought for years to get Jeffrey Epstein arrested. We fought to hold people accountable. We did not fight so that it's turn into something political, or so that our rights would be violated once again. I lost years of my life fighting this, and so did many others. We did that so the next victim wouldn't have to. So don't let this work be in vain. Make the crime victims' rights act. Thank you so much.
Mr. Jones, you're now recognized for your piece.
Ladies and members of Congress, my name is Jenna Lisa Jones. I was 14 years old when I was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in Palm Beach. It has taken me many years to find my voice. For a long time, I stayed silent because I was afraid and because I did not understand why this happened to me. When I finally came forward, I made a commitment to use my voice responsibly. I'm here today to do exactly that. Last September, I went to Washington, D.C. along with other survivors with a simple request: transparency and accountability. We asked you to help us understand how Jeffrey Epstein was given a non-prosecution agreement, even though the government had evidence that he had sexually abused dozens of children, including me. We asked how he was allowed to leave jail in 2009 and continue harming young girls. We asked for answers that would hold our government accountable for its actions. We still do not have those answers. Instead, what we received caused harm all over, including too many of our survivor sisters who had never come forward before and who never wanted their names or abuse to become public. The Department of Justice released documents that expose our names, our social security numbers, and deeply personal information. Survivors and identities were made public. Husbands learned about their wives' abuse for the first time. Children learned about abuse of their mothers. from reporters, from strangers on the internet, and in some cases, from other kids at school. Some survivors learned that friends had also been abused only because they saw their dates in those documents. Others saw the most intimate details of their own crimes publicly exposed. Our privacy was violated. The government told itself over and over again that our information would be protected and properly redacted. Those promises were broken again. We came to you seeking answers for why our rights were violated in 2007. And in the process of asking for those answers, our rights were violated again. I want to believe that each of you in this room is listening because you truly care, not just about us, but about every child in this country who survived sexual abuse. Congress and the Department of Justice truly want to do right by the survivors. The path forward is not complicated. Acknowledge the failures. When Jeffrey Epstein was set free in 2009, and again when our privacy was shattered earlier this year, take responsibilities and provide meaningful remedies to the women who have been harmed over and over again. Please do not force us to relive this during more litigation. Pass a law requiring the Department of Justice to compensate victims for the harm that they had caused by releasing the names and information. That would show that this is truly about helping victims. Second, with respect to our ongoing investigations, please remember this. Jeffrey Epstein's death. If Wayne Maxwell is in prison. Do not hurt Maxwell. If there are other men who hurt women, hold them accountable. But please leave the survivor alone. If you subpoena someone to testify before your committees and she tells him she is a victim, listen to her. Believe her. Respect her trauma. Jeffrey tries to paint his victims as bad guys. To avoid responsibility for himself. Please learn and understand that. Sharing our story should be a choice. The choice I was able to make today. It should never be something survivors are forced to do. The girls who were ruined by Wayne Maxwell and abused by Jeffrey Epstein should not be treated like criminals. Please learn the stories of the women who have been harmed before you force them to testify in a room full of strangers about the worst moments of their lives. Jeffrey Epstein destroyed so many of our lives, and Wayne Maxwell helped him do it. Do not blame the survivors for the crimes of the abusers. That is not how the story should end. I'm very closer to the story of Jeffrey Epstein to allow survivors and this country to finally begin to move forward so that one day, and I pray soon, Jeffrey Epstein's name is no longer something we're forced to hear every single day. And my last point, I'm not here today only to talk about the past. I'm here for the children who are sitting in the classroom today, children who may be vulnerable, confused, and unsure of what is happening to them. When I was a teenager, I did not have the language to understand what was happening to me. I did not know who to tell. I did not know where to go. Many of us didn't. We were young and we were manipulated. We were left without the tools or the support we needed. That is something Congress can change. Every middle school and high school student in this country should receive education on the signs of sexual abuse and exploitation. What it looks like, how to recognize it, and how to safely report it. Schools should have trained adults, accessible resources, so that no child feels at loss or is alone as needed. I have worked with other survivors to start a nonprofit called the Survivor Z, because not everyone who got been abused has access to strong legal representation, therapy, or support systems. I became a certified life coach. I believe in getting others the support in which I had. Though the survivors, we are able to provide these services to people who have been abused so they can begin their healing journey too. I'm proud of that work, but individual efforts are not enough. Real change requires leadership at a national level. You have power to make sure that happens to us does not happen again on this scale. I think one of the most important places again is in our schools. train teachers, educate students, give children a place to turn when they feel they have nowhere else to go. And together we can do better for the next generation.
Ms. Betsy, you are now recognized for your statement.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Danny Zemsky. I was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in 2004 and 2005. That was 8 years after Lev Parnas first reported Jeffrey to the FBI. Although discussing my abuse is far from easy, I live with diagnosed PTSD from that experience. My story is actually one of the safest stories to tell. The key abuser who caused me physical harm is dead. It's imperative to understand that the stories you are hearing today are a tiny fraction of the whole. I'm one of more than 1,200 girls and women. I don't face the same level of threats of defamation lawsuits and serious risks to my safety as some of my survivor sisters do. While there are co-conspirators who do need to be held accountable for the parts that they played in the operation of my own abuse, I was attracted only to Jeffrey, which really, unfortunately, is not the case for so many others. I was groomed prior to meeting Jeffrey. I grew up in the dance world where perfectionism, body image issues ran rampant in a world that was built on hierarchy and secrecy. I would have my body criticized, critiqued, and manipulated, and not so different from what I initially experienced with Jeffrey. I was trafficked to Jeffrey. I had two recruiters. One was only 18, and the other was only 15 years old, just trying to escape her own abuse. Jeffrey weaponized my aspirations and dreams by speaking the language of dance and making false promises. My mom had been diagnosed with a brain tumor. I had seen the name Epstein listed on a donor wall and believed that his wealth and power had come from the medical profession. I brought him for scannings, hoping to understand her diagnosis. Instead of helping her, he used my mother's brain scans over me, giving me an ultimatum: either recruit more girls or do more for him. I didn't end up recruiting anyone, and instead just endured the abuse. In May of 2005, my mother had a successful operation at Mount Sinai to remove the tumor, and I finally extricated myself from Jeffrey's web. The Epstein case demonstrates that institutional systems have failed survivors time and time again. I was first subpoenaed in 2008 for an interview. I was just 20 years old, and without a victim's rights advocate or a lawyer, I didn't know that I was entitled to those protections. No one told me I was safe. And for many parts of my interview, it felt like an interrogation. Jeffrey had already threatened my friend, and he had told me that I would be charged with prostitution if I ever interacted with law enforcement. He made it clear that he held the cards. The passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act was a moment in which survivors hoped and believed that we might see some reckoning. But the system yet again failed survivors. Before the first document dumped by the DOJ, my lawyer teamed up with another law firm representing survivors. Together, they submitted 350 victims' names to the DOJ, and names that needed to be redacted prior to the deadline on December 19th. In the first round of documents, I saw my name in 2 places. Then in the January dump, there were more, and the redactions were far, far worse. These files displayed my name, my phone number, my old address, where I worked at the time, where I was studying, and other identifying information. What's important to understand is that these documents weren't just somehow overlooked and not redacted at all. On one document, my nickname, Danny, redacted, while Danielle Hannah Bensky is left completely unredacted. I am just one of the hundreds of survivors exposed like this. A few weeks ago, Legal analysts reached out to share that yet again, my name appeared in a record batch of only 20 documents. After my lawyer continued to contact the DOJ on multiple occasions for protection, my name and information remained attached. These documents hold disturbing and yet incomplete accounts of my abuse, and they were viewable not only by the entire world, but my child, my students, my students' parents, my friends, my employers, my colleagues, my family. I'm public. However, in my FBI 302, a Jane Doe who has never ever wanted to be revealed was exposed. This outing of survivor names does real irrevocable damage. The passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act was meant to be a moment when survivors could regain their power and finally obtain the truth. It was a time for our institutions created to protect the American people to for once stand on the side of survivors. As survivors, we have said time and time again, this is not political. This requires coming together and prioritizing coming together, not political chauvinism. I'm always asked, what does accountability look like? Accountability means removing perpetrators from power, seeing arrests be made, and legislators pass laws like protecting victims like Virginia's law, which would remove the statute of limitations for victims' civil claims against their abusers. Our entrenched systemic failures have allowed powerful people like Jeffrey to thrive. When institutions prioritize protecting the powerful and their enablers over protecting victims, abuse becomes normalized. If we continue down this path, the question isn't whether abuse will happen again, but who will be the next Jeffrey Epstein. This moment is critical. It is time to reform our system to protect our survivors, not the perpetrators, and to ensure the truth can come to light. Thank you.
It's just so hard feeling to listen to these statements.
Thank you. Ms. Rosa, you are now like the nice sport. You will be student.
In 2008, I just turned 18. So when I was in MC Square Market, his name is Jean Luther now. Coming from a financial and stable background, I was the perfect target for coercion. I was promised modeling career beyond the dream. In less than 6 months, MC Square got senior 01 meter for me. I think it's nearly impossible for a teenager with almost no experience. I did not have the documentation to earn that visa. By May of 2009, I was in New York City. I was isolated, controlled in a manner I've never experienced before. Within 3 months, the agency claimed I owed them over $10,000. I had no family, no friends, or no money. MC Square controlled every aspect of my life, where I went, how I dressed, and how I looked. They provided me enough allowance to keep me afloat, but never enough to be independent. Less than a month after I arrived to the United States, my agency sent me to a home of a registered sex offender. I was introduced to his girlfriend under the disguise that she was a photographer who helped me build my portfolio. Now I know that Jeffrey Epstein was supposed to be in jail cell in June of 2008. I met him in his house right here in West Palm Beach. He was not in jail. Jean-Luc Bernal brought me to West Palm Beach to have dinner with Epstein in July. Epstein used the names of powerful politicians to demonstrate his influence. He told me he's an investor of the very agency that promised me a career. He also spoke of his arrest that he was a gay, bragging about girls visiting his cell and his friendships with authorities. Jeffrey offered me a position at the Florida Science Foundation to handle phone calls to help me with my financial troubles. One day, his masseuse called me into his room where I was molested for the first time by Jeff. For the following 3 years, I was subject to ongoing rape. Jeffrey Epstein was not there house for the molestation of underage girls at the exact time he was abusing me. Saying that the fact that he could commit those acts made justice feel impossible to me, and it took my ability to seek for help. I was summoned to his residence right here in West Palm Beach. My agency relocated me to Miami to keep me closer, and only after he was released from the house arrest, I was about to go back to New York City, where my nightmares continued. Those years of abuse turned into a decade of fear that I still carry today. I eventually found the courage to reach out for help. I stepped forward among other survivors, hoping those who allowed this to happen will be held accountable. I kept my identity protected as Jim Doe. I read up one day with my name mentioned over that times.
This is so sad.
Being protected by reduction, my name was exposed to the world. Now reporters from across the globe contact me. I cannot live without looking over my shoulder. I can only imagine the long-term impact this space will have on my life. I wanted to be a doctor, but I did. So I want to end this statement with a story. In 1800, the doctor named Ignace Weiss discovered something life-saving. He realized that the doctors who were performing autopsies and then immediately delivering babies without washing their hands were carrying cadaverous particles, causing women dying aggregate. And even that evidence he had solution, he begged the medical establishment to watch their hands to save lives. But the doctors were offended. They found it easier to protect their own reputation and maintain the status quo than to admit they were the ones causing harms. They chose to die for the life of women, and Dr. Semmelweis was ignored, ridiculed, and eventually cast down. I see the same guidance happening today with handling of these files. Releasing my name while redacting the name of another file is not a mistake, it's a choice. It's a choice to prioritize the comfort of an institution over the safety of the survivors. The evidence is right here, yet those empowered people, number us, died socially, emotionally, and physically. That admit their own complicity. I am no longer Jado, hidden in the files. I'm a woman, I'm a fighter, and I'm a witness, and I'm begging you, please wash your hands.
Strong. Is Arik, her lawyer. We've had him on our show. We're going to speak to them later with some of the survivors.
Thank you, Ms. Rosa. Obviously, I think one of the true rewards of this investigation has been the way still many survivors continue to be traumatized. And it's one it's really good example of how even the Transparency Act so much more and retraumatization continues to happen. So thank you for your testimony, Mr. Kubin. My recommendation for Dr. Dixon. Thank you. All right, sure. And you have a note folks. My name is Spencer Kubin. I represented numerous survivors of sexual exploitation and trafficking over the years, including the first victim to come forward in the Epstein investigation here in Palm Beach. Here today because what happened during the prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein was not simply a failure of judgment. It was a systemic failure of justice. In Palm Beach County, credible evidence
of widespread sexual abuse involving minors was presented to state prosecutors, including my client. Law enforcement initially identified dozens of victims. The conduct was organized, repeated, and devastating. Yet instead of a prosecution that matched the scale of the harm, what followed was a secret agreement, as we know, that minimized the abuse and insulted the children that had been abused. Despite the efforts of some of the federal agents at the time, the U.S. Attorney's Office of Southern District decided to have these secret meetings with Epstein's attorneys. The U.S. Department of Justice, in conjunction with the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office at the time, colluded in secret to quietly shelve this case with minimal state charges that branded a 15 and 16-year-old child victim as prostitutes. They gave a sweetheart deal to Jeffrey Epstein and 4 named as well as unnamed co-conspirators. The Southern District U.S. Attorney at the time, Alex Acosta, spearheaded what every attorney advocate saw as the worst non-prosecution agreement ever executed by a U.S. attorney. This sent a message. It told victims that even when the evidence is strong, accountability is negotiable if you are rich, powerful. This awful non-prosecution agreement completely shut down voting accountable charges for the events they were investigating here in Florida. As I mentioned, that tragic deal was negotiated and signed in secret. Not only was it kept secret from the world, it was kept secret from me. Calls were made repeatedly to the U.S. attorneys investigating this at the time by myself. And I advocate for multiple victims at the time. And of course, it was kept secret from those victims. I was forced to file motions with the court to compel its ultimate disclosure, even after it had been executed. And finally, after obtaining the board orders, they turned it over to us. Over a year after it had been signed, the victims were not consulted. Their advocates like me were not consulted. Victims were never given an opportunity to be heard. This was not just a moral failure. We believed it was a violation of law under the Crime Victims' Rights Act, originally passed in 2004, subsequently amended by Congress in 06, 08, and 15. Victims have had the right to confer with prosecutors and the right to be treated with fairness and respect. Yet those rights were ignored at the very moment that it mattered most, when decisions were being made that would determine whether justice would ever be pursued. The result was predictable. Survivors, as you heard, were re-traumatized, not only by the abuse they endured, but by a system that excluded them from the process designed specifically to protect them. And the public was left questioning whether justice can be trusted regardless of starting law. This failure by the Department of Justice at the time was a subject of litigation brought, as you heard, by Ms. Wyland. That case ultimately exposed a gap in the law, one that must be closed by you. Today, I will offer that clear cut kingdom. First, Congress should amend the Crime Victims' Rights Act to make it explicit that victims must be notified and given a meaningful opportunity to confirm before any non-prosecution agreement or deferred prosecution agreement is finalized. Second, as you heard, there must be enforceable remedies, not just suggestions. Victims should have standing to challenge agreements reached in violation of the Act, and courts must have the authority to review and, where appropriate, void those agreements. Third, transparency must be the rule, not the exception. Secret agreements that extinguish criminal liability, particularly in cases involving multiple victims, should not exist in our system of justice. And finally, there must be accountability. When prosecutors fail to uphold victims' rights, there must be consequences sufficient to ensure that those failures are not repeated. This is not about being litigated on the past. It's about ensuring what happened here never happens again. The survivors in this case are showing extraordinary courage coming here today. They told the truth and they trusted the system. And the system failed. Congress now has the opportunity and suggests the responsibility to fix it. Thank you for the forward question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Ms. Rush, now it's nice.
Thank you so much for the members of the Congress. I'm Lauren Birch, the CEO of that application, the largest anti-trafficking coalition in the country. We have nearly 200 member organizations across the country. Many of those organizations are survivor-led. It is an absolute honor to sit beside each one of you. You are the reason this moment of reckoning is happening. What we have witnessed in the handling of the Epstein case is not simply a bureaucratic misstep. It is a deeply horrific failure to protect the very people the system is meant to serve. Survivors have repeatedly been promised dignity, confidentiality, and care. And instead, we have seen a systemic breakdown in their protection at nearly every step of the way. We have watched those with power and privilege manipulate the system, shielding themselves from accountability, while survivors have suffered in silence. Every one of these failures sends a devastating message, not only to Epstein survivors, but to survivors everywhere, that accountability is optional for the powerful. Survivors have had enough, and frankly, the American public has had enough of this too. We are now in a moment of reckoning that requires a thorough examination of all of the things that have gone horribly wrong. But it also requires a serious course correction. Survivors have been repeatedly harmed, first by Epstein and his associates, and then by law enforcement who refused to bring adequate cases, who didn't notify victims when secret sweetheart deals were made, who allowed abuse to continue even after pleas were entered in. And then they were again abused by the DOJ. When the federal government fails to provide protection under the Crime Victims' Rights Act, survivors cannot be left without remedies. We need a legislative fix immediately to provide compensation and recourse for violations of the Crime Victims' Rights Act. And this is urgent. I think everyone in the room has held to survivors and understands the profound harm caused by the DOJ in releasing hundreds of millions of survivors and their personal information in the aftermath of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. So I'll keep this part brief. As a former prosecutor, I understand that mistakes happen. We're human. But when hundreds of names are released repeatedly, including nude photos of a survivor, this can no longer be dismissed as human error. Something has gone horribly wrong inside the DOJ, and the American public deserves clear answers about how this failure has occurred. This requires a recorded deposition of Pam Bondi on May 29th, not a transcribed interview.
That's right.
Survivors also deserve meaningful legislative recourse, including a private right of action, so that they can be compensated for the exposure of their private information to the public. Accountability cannot end with an examination of process failures or even legislative fixes. These files demand further examination. Assertions that there are no credible investigative leads are deeply concerning. From my perspective, both as the CEO of World League and a former prosecutor, that conclusion is not only premature, it is inconsistent with the available record. There is an abundance of potential investigative leads that warrant serious independent review. For 3 decades, countless men operated with complete impunity. Sex trafficking does not happen in a vacuum. It is driven by the demand for commercial sex, and it is enabled by systems and people who are willing to look the other way. That is exactly what we're looking at here. Likely the largest sex trafficking operation the United States has ever seen. The files are clear, and the files name names. When individuals and institutions surface repeatedly in the files, it's a pretty strong indicator that there's some there. When there are millions and millions of dollars flowing between an individual and Epstein, and there doesn't seem to be a business relationship, but instead allegations of sexual abuse, that's not noise to ignore. That is an investigative lead. And this is just one of many examples. And the examples are not just limited to individuals. Major hospitals took money from Epstein and provided questionable care. And that's putting it at stake. Hospital systems, academic institutions, modeling agencies, and the list goes on. They all require careful, independent examination of investigative leads. The burden should not fall on the survivors to name names or drive investigations. Survivors should be given safe, voluntary spaces to speak, but they should not be compelled. The responsibility lies with investigative bodies, prosecutors, the DOJ, on relevant authorities to do their jobs thoroughly, transparently, and with integrity. Survivors have already carried far too much of the burden. They should not have to carry the failures of our institutions as well. What is needed now is not defensiveness, but accountability. And finally, for survivors and for world without exploitation, this is not and has never been political. I'm sure that it would be twisted into us entering the political fray by being here today. But we have been absolutely clear. We will and have worked with anyone who is serious about getting to the truth. The era of silence and inaction must end here. Thank you.
Obviously, thank you to all of our witnesses for the these statements. We're going to be moving on to questions and comments from the members of this committee. I do want to uplift and recognize particularly the survivors and their courage again and how we got to this moment. I'm going to start just by, again, just commenting that we're here into the horrific crimes of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and numerous others, and the failures caused by our open government. And I want to, in my line of questioning, I just want to open down to one thing that I think is really important. Last July, the administration's FBI and DOJ released a 2-page document saying, and I quote, "We did not uncover evidence that could predicate investigation against uncharged third parties." In other words, the current administration, through its DOJ, believed that this investigation was over, that no one else could be investigated for perhaps the worst sex trafficking ring in American history, that no other person can be held accountable, or there could be further convictions of the horrors made and against 1,200 women and girls. Now, we here and some of our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle work together to file motions, to file laws, and to push this investigation forward. And I want to be very clear. The DOJ, this administration, the president and the attorney general made it clear that this investigation, in their opinion, was a hoax, was a lie, and it was nothing else to do to move forward. The DOJ tried to close this case. Through our investigation, we have learned that many of the witnesses that we have been going to deposition, to transcribe interviews, were never questioned by law enforcement. And this is something that we learned only by forcing these interviews and by sitting asking these questions. How could Les Wexner have never been interviewed by their own government, who was the source of most of Jeffrey Epstein's wealth? and was never questioned. How could some of the books on this document the FBI had in their possession not ever have been questioned by our own government or law enforcement? How could Derek Dyke and Richard Kahn, who you can see in this chart, and were essentially the brain trust of Jeffrey Epstein's organization, how could they never have been questioned? That is not a mistake. That is a cover. And I think we want to make it very clear is this is not just about the mistakes and the ongoing harm of the Trump administration. This has been harm posed by numerous administrations led by both Republicans and Democrats. And when folks come and ask, well, why wasn't the former administration Attorney General Garland engaged on this issue? I ask the same question. Why wasn't Merrick Garland more engaged and focused on prosecutions and more focused on getting out the truth? This is not just about partisan politics. This is a continuing pattern of abuse and not seeking justice. But we're here now, at this moment, in this Congress, with this administration, and this cover-up must end. I want to briefly ask the survivors, if you believe that this investigation should continue, your government should continue this investigation, this specimen.
Yes.
Rosa,
So will be yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Ms. Jones,
Yes.
thank you. And we agree. It's unacceptable that most of it not questioned, that there haven't been criminal prosecutions, and that our own former Attorney General continues to be engaged in this cover. They want to end this investigation. What we are saying today is we have come together with our bipartisan allies on the other side, and especially some Republican women who have stood and continue to push for truth and justice. We welcome their support for this investigation. At a hearing back in March, former Attorney General Biden told one of my colleagues, quote, "I'm stunned that you want to continue talking about Epstein." That was her quote. Ms. Fesky, you were there. So was Skywalker on behalf of Virginia. Attorney General Biden didn't spend 1 minute talking to you, but instead wanted to end the Epstein investigation. Today, we're here to tell the former Attorney General that we are demanding that she come in for her date, the subpoena, that she testify in her oath, and it's videotaped and released to the American public, and the survivors deserve nothing less. And I want to again ask the survivors. We know that approximately 2.5 million documents are still in. And we also understand that anything that's released in the future needs to be adapted with care and thought. Do you all support this Congress in the continued release of the files if redactions are done properly and with care? Ms. Besky,
Of course it's you.
Rosa,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Thank you. I think it's important for the Attorney General, for Mr. Blanche, and for others to hear directly. Survivors don't think this is a hoax, but the investigation is one. Everyone in this group is committed to making the truth and justice a part of our legislative work. We have to pass laws and do the right thing. What we're facing right now is a systemic government, agencies, and administration that's trying to end this work. And we have to push back on it. We have sworn testimony. We've seen emails from the Epstein state, from many others, even about the relationship and the friendship between the current president and Jeffrey Epstein. We continue to demand that the president forces DOJ to do the right thing by the survivors and to ensure that we get truth and justice. We're just a few miles away from our 11, where we know the lady recruited and harmed the abuse women, where Virginia herself was recruited. And we also know that the president, or his residence just a few miles from here, is the one man in America that has the power to do the right thing and force the DOJ to release the files, protect the survivors, and demand and ensure that the American people get the truth. And that's why we're here today. And with that, I yield, and I will turn it over to Representative Fisher. Thank you, surrounding members. Thank you to all the witnesses. Thank you for your bravery, its conviction, and determination. Today, I want to ask you first about Ghislaine Maxwell. This filed in a written victim impact statement that was filed before. You said that the abuse you suffered was, quote, deliberate and systematic, designed by Epstein and facilitated by his staff and associates, including Ghislaine Maxwell, correct?
I don't think that's I never had an inflation as well. Can you repeat that?
In a victim impact statement in January 2 for the United States.
Oh, yes. Yes. I was against that. I'm sorry. I've never met Ghislaine Maxwell, but yes, that's what the other thing, though.
Ms. Spensky, at Maxwell's trial, survivors testified that Maxwell participated in the sexual abuse of girls. Maxwell recruited victims for Epstein, including at schools. And that Maxwell once told a 14-year-old girl that she, quote, had a great body for Epstein and his villains. And that was testified to.
Yeah, I also, my experience was not pleasant with Maxwell, but I'm sure that is true.
Ms. Jones, after Maxwell was found guilty of unconscionable acts, Politico reported that Maxwell's lawyer, this guy right here, said that there's a good chance and for good reason that Maxwell would get a pardon. You have publicly stated that, quote, clemency would be a slap in the face to all survivors, right? I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think everyone in this panel agrees probably. Maxwell hasn't shown any guilt, hasn't shown any remorse, hasn't shown any ounce of accountability for what she did. I've introduced a House resolution condemning clemency for Maxwell. I hope everyone here will join me because we have to do everything in our power to block a pardon from Ghislaine Maxwell. I want to turn to another topic following the pardon. You're aware of Epstein-related financial records called suspicious activity reports, SARS reports, that have not been produced correctly. Yes. And just to level set, a suspicious activity report is a report produced by a bank anytime a customer performs a questionable transaction. It turns out there were numerous such reports filed by banks with the Treasury Department for Jeffrey Epstein, including large cash withdrawals and even requests that Epstein made for the creation of bank accounts and credit cards for teenagers and people who had nothing to do with his family. Isn't that right?
It is.
The Senate Finance Committee has found Epstein made wire transfers that are detailed in these suspicious activity reports, SARS reports, to the tune of $1.5 billion with a B, and include the names of women and girls he may have trafficked, as well as the names of his potential clients. I believe that this is paramount to the investigation of the sex trafficking. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that.
If we're serious about following the money, I believe that these SARS reports must be disclosed by the U.S. Treasury Department now, immediately today. Last topic, please, first. Can you believe this? These 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, they must be disclosed today. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree with you.
They may be among us today. Wow. Perpetrating a continuation of a sex trafficking. Now, Mr. Common, DOJ has now released all of the raw and abusive transcripts from the more than 40 victims of the DOJ's that were investigated in the DOJ's 2008 investigation, right?
Correct.
And DOJ has not released all of the video footage collected at Epstein's properties, correct?
Absolutely. Not only that, I've actually walked through the home of Jeffrey Epstein after the incidents occurred and saw where the video cameras were located if they no longer existed.
Epstein tried to maintain his power over those he abused by taking away their chance at justice. We cannot let that happen. Donald Trump, I'm calling on you to listen to survivors. Release all of the documents. Unredact all these people. Prosecute the rest of these people and investigate the remaining. In addition, Ghislaine Maxwell should never, ever, ever receive clemency. That monster should not be given pardon, and ensure every enabler of Epstein faces consequences, no matter who they are or political affiliation. Thank you, and I can quit. Now, 100% understand.
Right. Well, good morning, everyone. And I just want to start out by acknowledging our survivors who are here with us and to those of you who spoke. People tell you all the time that you're brave, and you are, but I know that it comes at great cost to yourself, great cost to your families. But I want you to know part of why I asked the staff to hold up this picture is because you are literally changing the face of the planet by standing up and telling your stories. And even though the system is failing you again right now in Congress, you are changing the world by helping people who are survivors, who are victims, who have never had their stories told publicly to know that they're not alone. So I want to say thank you for everything that you are doing. And I know that it's hard, but what you're doing is changing the planet. So thank you for holding that up. I got in early yesterday and I went for a walk. I walked to downtown here in West Palm Beach, and then I walked across the bridge. I think, like millions of people across the country, I've seen, of course, the documentary that documents what happened here in West Palm Beach. And I wanted to walk across the bridge that survivors had told the story themselves and literally having been driven across. But I don't think that I truly understood the power, the wealth, the abuse that has happened in this community until I saw the mansions and the estates, the private clubs, and how inequality is literally written into the landscape here. And the reason why I wanted to start there is because there has been a lot said about the system of abuse that Epstein and Maxwell perpetrated. There has been a lot said about how grooming occurred, how recruitment happened, and how he psychologically threatened, abused, and used all these different tactics to abuse girls and women. And I want to make one thing clear here today, and I want to ask some questions about this, is we talk about the system failing. The system didn't fail. The system was designed to protect the wealthy. The system was rigged from the beginning when those mansions were built. The system was built on inequality. The system was built on exploiting. It's written into the landscape here in West Palm Beach. It's written into the landscape in New Mexico, where Jeffrey Epstein went to Santa Fe with his rich friends and recruited girls that he exploited and then trafficked to other rich friends that he flew to New Mexico. This wasn't failure. This was a system. It was a system of exploitation. It was a system of abuse. And it was a system of power. And that's one of the things that I want to really dive into here with my short time today. Because the officials, the federal, the state, the local, the attorney generals didn't just fail to investigate these cases. They chose not to investigate them. They chose to take bribes and kickbacks and campaign donations. The police department here in West Palm Beach chose to take a donation from Jeffrey Epstein. The police and sheriffs and others in other cities and states chose to take donations. And right now, while this is not a partisan issue, this administration is choosing to not investigate the crimes that are in these files. This administration is choosing to release the names of survivors and not perpetrators. This administration is choosing to not investigate or indict a single man who committed rape of a child or woman that is in the files. And this administration is choosing to gaslight the American people while all over the world, foreign officials are investigating. A prince has been taken down, and here in the United States, our Department of Justice, which is sitting on millions of files, is refusing to act. That is not a failure, that is a choice. That is a system built on wealth, inequality, and exploitation of women, of girls, of children, and a system built to protect the powerful. That is a system. And it is a system that Jeffrey Epstein developed here in West Palm Beach. And then it is a system that he exported to places like the Virgin Islands, to New Mexico, and to all of the places that he operated. And so I want us to think about as we're moving forward with this investigation, we can investigate all the hundreds or even thousands of micro decisions that were made by local police, by sheriffs, by state police, by the Department of Justice, by AGs who chose to turn a blind eye and not prosecute these crimes. But the only way we are actually going to get justice in this case is by changing the system themselves. And that's exactly what you guys are doing. And it's how you're literally taking on the entire world right now and a system of wealth and inequality. So I want to ask the survivors, because I feel like you get asked all the time to retell your stories, and I write your stories. Anyone can go in the files and read your stories, but I want to hear from you what justice could look like in this case. So maybe starting here on you. It's always a sore subject. If I'm just like at this point, honestly, I don't think justice will ever be served in this case. And that's just my experience of the past 20 years that I've done. If I were really optimistic, and it is, I think it would be for one time because it was raised that you have to face that law. Also, education in the school system. Maybe like with the sex ed, of course, just there has to be more education. Yes, there's almost sex trafficking is. It's not, I think a lot of people have a picture in their head. It's not reality. And for me, being that this happened to Fabi's family, I think there needs to be like a building. And I think that the first 72 hours that a survivor tells their story and comes forward and says, okay, I'm ready to tell this. And there is such a crucial time. I think there needs to be something dedicated in Palm Beach County to all of our childhoods that were lost and taken. We came forward and they told our stories. Man, I was treated like a criminal by the federal government. And I had to think, I guess justice would be changed. I don't know what justice looks like anymore. It's just one way that it's about document that, and that's what I hope this would be, like Martin said, accountability. People that did wrong need to be held accountable for what they did. Of course, that, but do we think So I think that is gonna truly happen. Probably not. Look at all that's going on. But education, it's so very important. Our kids are listening so well. He's in his third year, and for the first time, and for a lot of children, this is the first time they're even hearing involved. And so I think it's important. We can't take these bad guys off the street or his teachers getting all this life as well. And it's- but I think I hope it doesn't have something to do with health. And maybe that start with gotten a good fall and just have a really great place to start because that person has kind of that right. I know I'm almost 40, like I'm about 40 this year, and what's devastating to look at these and just people could sit and write it and read it. And so there are a lot of survivors with younger similar about the fears that have looked at these law changing the statute of limitations and to the culture shift that really needs to happen, where the blame needs to be placed on the perpetrator and not on the victim. My experience with law enforcement, I was so terrified and I didn't feel like I was being interrogated the entire time that I was there. I think I was in jail. That was my life is over. It would really make me want to talk to anybody, but yeah, I came back to my home in 2019. Anyway, after that, it was very definitely feeling. So having an advocate in those spaces would also be really important. But yeah, just elevating survivor rights and making sure that we start with that baseline to protect as well. So I come from a different country and have a job. And sometimes when you're asking me, what should I do? And ask a question about my job, talking to you, it's different. I appreciate you asking that question. That's your job. You guys have to figure it out how to be justice. And, and you can give justice. Like this, when I came to this country, I thought things going to be different. And I am shocked that this is happening here in the United States. You keep on saying this is the worst case in the United States, but it's not the worst case in the world.
That's right.
It's never happened in other places that I traveled as a model all over the world. This didn't happen to me there, it happened to me here. You need to figure it out, and then what do you do? And I hope this never happens again. Anyway, people that are in still groups, don't stop fighting. Don't let it go away. I don't. I wish one day we all can sit there and never share the names. But I hope so both that we know forever okay. So this never happens again.
That's good. Good luck.
That's it all. It's our job. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing that response. Thank you so much. I want to also be very specific. As we know, Jeffrey Epstein trafficked and abused women and girls, not just in Florida, New York, but internationally, across the globe. This case shines a light on the truth of sex trafficking, and it informs us as members of Congress of the changes and the reforms we need to pursue in many different areas that sometimes seem different or all connected. I want to first thank you all for coming here today, especially the survivors and sharing your stories. In many instances, we have seen that traffickers and sexual predators control the employment opportunities for the people of faith and use. This happens everywhere, from working communities to the wealthiest and the most powerful pockets of society. Right here, this is from documents produced to the committee. It appears to show copies of passports in Epstein's possession belonging to young women. We believe many of these are survivors. Epstein's network is bigger than what many people understand. It's stretched across the entire globe. And we know that Epstein did not act alone. Him and his associates exploited financial and immigration systems, broken immigration systems, to traffic women and girls. Epstein helped women enroll in English language schools, facilitated their admission into American universities that helped them get visas and helped them secure jobs, all as a premise to get for getting women into the United States.
He questioned Epstein's lawyer about this and his accountant about the sham marriages which they helped arrange for immigration purposes. And many of these women, sadly, became survivors of Epstein's abuse. Rosa, thank you so much for your very powerful testimony. Why did you come to the United States? You spoke a little bit about it.
That was the comment. I came here thinking that my model career is going into information this year. I traveled before the United States and I was very successful. When I was able to escape the ring of Jeffrey Epstein, I was a successful model. But only after, during it, I quit.
So you came for opportunity,
Yes.
and we told you, right? We told the entire world, we told the entire world to come to the United States for opportunity. It's still a random opportunity where you can be anywhere we can do anything.
Yes. New York City was a top of the list for any model traveling in the country.
Rosie, can you help us understand how Epstein, Brunel, and their associates used the promises of modeling jobs to recruit to be another one?
When you enter a public, you have a dream of and watching a very secret show or the cover of both magazines. So when you're a teenager, if somebody approached you said that they can be there to help you and be your ally, I hate that word really because that was used many times in trying to make it believe that they are my ally, in order to get those jobs. So naturally, it comes across like these people care. And we believe that why we could see just a teenager, it doesn't look really scary to begin with. So they gain the trust. And then they put you in a situation where financially you can't leave. The ticket back home cost $1,300 round trip. I was giving $100 in New York City to survive. And if any of you go to New York City today and try to live over $100, good luck.
Rosa, we also know that Epstein, you're an immigrant, and we know that Epstein and his network also manipulate and threaten women using their visas or immigration status. Can you talk about your experience of this?
Every time I came to my agency or Epstein, which I didn't know why they didn't give it to them, I begged them to let me go back to other places I used to model before. Which they said, why? You're not going to do well there, so stay here. What do you do? I would say, yeah. And then they offered me a job. They didn't give me money to purchase a ticket, and I didn't have a credit card. I didn't have my parents sending me money. I couldn't afford a ticket. So they mind you, financed me saying that it's just the time and everything's going to be okay. And if I trust her, all my dreams going to come true.
Look, we know that she weaponized people's immigration status, right? The fact that they were immigrants, again, to look at that, to force them into his horrible crimes and the horrible things he did to them. There are so many changes that have come from this investigation. And I think it's important that we also remember immigrant women are disproportionately impacted by sex trafficking in the United States. Epstein exploited this broken immigration system to do these crimes. And I think your story, your testimony shows that, and the other stories and testimonies that we've heard. This investigation shows us that we have to fix this stuff, not just demonize immigrants. And in a moment where the same people that are obstructing this investigation, the same people who are engaged in the cover-up of this investigation are also the one demonizing immigrants across this country, shows us the real truth, that if we spent a modicum of the money and energy that this government is using to go terrorize their communities and round up innocent people, to go after the billionaire pedophiles and sex traffickers and people who have exploited this broken immigration system, maybe we had some justice here. And so just thank you so much for being here and your testimony. I yield back.
And I'll be honest, and you remember, I want to start like me by surrounding us and the people who have too often have been ignored. Survivors like Daniel who was just 17 when she was born, worked for Justice Epstein with both Parnas and his friends of her mother's illness. Rose of his traffic across borders and abuse for years, working wild, who not only survived abuse, but then had to be a legal fight for recognition by the Department of Justice that was supposed to protect her. And Lisa Jones, who had signed for the alarm that children would be subdued to house, and that's an impossible problem. Color. As a meticulous here,
I just stepped out for a second. As you can see, there's a lot going on. Not on like better charger, like an iPhone charger or something.
I don't. I'm sorry.
That's all right. No worries. I'm just trying to get my charger right now. Figure out to charge the phone a little bit. Figure out see if we can get it here. They're working. I'm taking you guys. I'm trying to find an iPhone charger to be able to, because my battery is about to die, and I want to continue giving you the message. And you just see you going. Okay, well,
diet. Of the perpetrator of sex beyond empathy and from survivors themselves who have names they seem to have no less far not going forward to help is going to be and it's going to be I thought that they held the far you represent one of the first survivors in Florida. We saw an investigation activity that showed it that state to protect this associates. Can you explain why that individual was so unusual and how?
So, first of all, as I said before, it was unusual because ordinarily the U.S. Attorney's Office would consult with counsel for the victims and talk about the potential charges that they were going to bring. They never did that. They kept it secret. They did not answer phone calls. When I was able to get through to the U.S. Attorney at the time, was Maria Villafania, she said, I can't talk to you. Second, and it was so unusual because it not only gave immunity to Jeffrey Epstein, who was the target in their investigation, but it gave immunity to co-conspirators without prosecution of those co-conspirators, or even into the prosecution of 4 specifically named co-conspirators. Lastly, the most unusual part of that deal was that they added the phrase unnamed co-conspirators. I have never in 30 years doing this ever seen a non-prosecution agreement so broad as to say that they're giving immunity to unnamed individuals. It was a gift.
Yes, wow, briefly, you keep telling me about those emails between Epstein lawyers and the prosecutor. What made them seem different from what you would think a typical plea negotiation would look like? Yes, ma'am. When me and Brad Edwards were able to conduct the email, later they friends. They were meeting at Starbucks. They were meeting off the record, wherever they wanted. These were friends who literally negotiating how much time, what it would look like, what the charges were going to look like, what they were going to say during the grand jury. It was all. It was all. I just want to say really quickly: does any survivor feel had any self protected or seen her fighting them? No, it's just none of my the redaction and this none of my information. This is about a system that has survivors carrying the burden of proof, the burden of paychecks, the burden of pain, while people with wealth and power are given time, protection, and silence. Well, we're here today because of Jeffrey Epstein. Sexual abuse survivors across this country know all too well that he is not an anomaly, but he's a high-profile example of a system that too often works exactly as designed to shield abusers and silence those that they harm. So to all of the survivors, the fierce attorney advocates who are with us here today, just want to thank you for coming forward despite the many frustrations, the threats, the dangers, and the setbacks that you've experienced. We have a responsibility to all survivors who are still waiting, to the ones who have better gotten justice, and to the ones watching right now to say that this is here. We take that very seriously. Thank you all so much. My back.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lee. And now I am going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. I've been smiling probably more than I am supposed to as I've sat here because y'all bring me so much joy. Let me tell you why. The reason is this. It's because despite this incompetent government, y'all have not been gassed. For some people, it is the very first time that they're seeing your faces. But you've been there when no cameras are rolling. You've been there for decades, and you are still showing up. The reality is that you are not a child in this moment, but you know that other children are potentially being subjected to something similar in this exact moment. And it is your courage that is contagious. We don't have that, unfortunately, in Congress. We got a bunch of cowards. But your courage is contagious. Think about it this way. One of the things that I really want to clarify, because I have had an opportunity to hear some of your stories and meet with some of you in person and find those doors. A lot of people who potentially are not on the right side of history right now, it's one of the common questions they ask is, how is it that this what happened to so many people, yet when you were going through your experience, you failed to see anybody else or know anything else, and you thought that you were all alone. And I know that that is something you have told to me. So I would watch, and they're hearing numbers like, man, it's been support, but at the same time, they're hearing in us. Whoever feels most comfortable, if you will, because for me, I don't think that I have that much confidence in the government overall. No one was right for the right reason, but it is the pressure from outside. It is people going out there and being courageous. It is making the people rise up. That is why we were able to get some kind of movement. And so I want to build more allies for this movement right now. So if any of you would like to take me answer that question. Thank you for that, first of all. But I think it starts with our young people knowing that they need to speak up. Because for me, I think I was against the friend of mine that went the job for the first time. He was very good at using the manipulation to hold us there. And so I couldn't tell anybody, and I didn't tell anybody. So I think it starts with the youngest, like if an experience feels off, to have a young person speak out and talk to even just a friend about that. And then say to that friend, hey, this is helping you. Then the two of them and talk to adults. And then we're already making change because we're already taking it out of the dark. I think the secrecy was the hardest part in my own case. And meeting all the survivor sisters in September absolutely changed my life. And so I do think if you can find the community and if you can find the people who boost you, it's really important that it starts with our youngest survivors. Thank you so much for that. And it's that you one of them survivors. A quick question that I have for each of you is, do you believe that a child has the ability to consent to sex? So, interestingly enough, most of the time our laws, whether they're state or federal, acknowledge that as well. But I have a transcript and I won't go through it, but it relates to the case that stemmed out here where they were trying to make it seem as if a child's victim was a criminal. That was the focus of their questioning. So it is so frustrating because literally when I was in the state house in Texas, this is one of the things that I actually worked on, was making sure we changed the actual language of the code, specifically as we talked about child victims. So that brings me to kind of where we are on the federal. All right, because the time. I want to make sure we stay on time. My colleagues have been my colleagues are nicer today. It's words like cover up, choice. For me, it's obstruction of justice. It's real clear. And that's just the lawyer in me. This is pure obstruction. Anyone else that would engage in this type of behavior would be charged with obstruction of justice. Yet somehow, because it's the Department of Justice, the ones that are supposed to enforce justice and law in this country, we're not calling a thing, but that's what it is. So it is my hope that we understand that while these survivors have taken the time to come out, and some of them were out of it unlawfully and absolutely need to have some semblance of justice because of that illegal outing, because our law was very clear, to be clear about that. I need people to understand that we all have a goal to play. People in this moment keep asking, what is it that I can do? Well, I'm a big partisan as well, because they're not being partisan. The Republicans could have shown up today too. Yeah. They did. So let me be clear. I am going to be full on partisan. You have to vote. If you care about this, you have to vote, and you have to understand who is fighting for you. There are certain things that were always a basic kind of standard in this country for what was right. We protected the most vulnerable amongst us. We're not doing that nowadays. No. We made sure that people believed in quote unquote law and order, but we're not doing that nowadays. It is time to wake up. It is time for us all to do our part because, again, I'm going to be partisan because only the Democrats decided to show up today. So with that, I will yield and my takes. Okay, they make it skip it. Wow. Well, we're going to head to Virginia. It's your turn.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for being here today. Thanks to all the people in the audience here today. And I will just say that it's because of you, the Epstein file transparency, I'm honestly positive self-hack assignments a lot. They've got you making all the time. I'm trying to figure out how to break it later on. But it's because of you that we were able to issue the August subpoena by Representative Lee. And they still haven't complied with that subpoena, but it's because he was got that far. It's because they won't even hold hearings, real hearings, oversight committee on anything anymore because they're afraid we'll subpoena more people. Steve files and Epstein conspiracy. I'm just thinking about where you've gotten us. I know it's not enough. I mean, never be enough. Someone mentioned before, but I just want to thank you for getting us this far. And I know there are a lot of girls and women around the country, around the world, who thank you as well. One of the things that has driven me crazy is that there's millions of files that have still not been released. So this question really is for anyone. But one of the things that I remember hearing from many of the survivors last year was, you at least like your own files, your own witness statements. Has anyone received your own files? So no one has received their own files. And has the administration talked to you about potentially giving you those files? I'm saying everyone say no. And do they ever talk to you about which files they were withholding and why they would withhold them? Consult with you about that. I'm getting everyone shake their heads as well in the audience and all the witnesses we have today. And so I guess I would ask, we're going to be talking to someone next week, Pam Bondi. So do you have any suggestions on what we should ask her?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think there's a lot to ask her, right? But some people keep an engineers from them. I definitely why who are you covering for it? Like what would you say? You were willing to lose your job to cover up for these people. What did they have on you? Because I'm like, you're a woman, you're a mother, and you looked at us. You couldn't even look at the records. So, what's your part of this?
It has not.
process. What was the process? We would ask the same of Tom Blanche. What was the process for moving you as Maxwell?
She was speaking three very specific things that you should ask her. Number one, there were some hours of video surveillance taken by police investigators at the time outside the home, watching people go in and out of the house that is yet to be released, and we know it exists from the probable cause affidavit. Secondly, back in October of 2003, there was record evidence that there was surveillance inside the home because cash was stolen from Mr. Epstein by one of his workers, and Sarah Kelly showed police that video from inside the home. That means surveillance cameras, in fact, existed in the home. Where is that video? And then lastly, Maxwell photographed everything. She loved taking photographs of people. That was her passion. They have not released even a fraction of the photographs that Maxwell took.
So I'm just going to add on to Danny's point about process and being a little more specific. So what transpired in advance of the finals being released were a number of lawyers who were in this room providing DOJ with lists of names. I think one lawyer provided about 300 names, and those names got released in the first batch. Many of those names got released in the first batch and filings when they were dumped. The lawyer went back and said these names need to be redacted. I'm just going to use Danny as an example, so that's okay with Danny. So her lawyer went back and said redact Danny Benstein's name. The second time the files were released, the DOJ had not just the list of the names that the lawyers requested to be redacted, but also correspondence that said Danny's name was released in the first batch and a request to redact. Her name then appeared in the second batch. Another correspondence went to DOJ about Danny's specific. And then there was a third batch of documents. In the third batch of documents, I think Danny's name, her address, a picture of her dog, you name it, it was in the third batch. So I think we need to give examples, and I think we need a deep understanding of what transpired so that a group of high-powered lawyers were not able to identify names and properly redact them.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to put volumes then in the series and put them.
Thank you. Before I get to my questions, I want to say something to the witnesses for us. I spent years as a prosecutor in cases that involved serious abuses like this. In a county that issued 10,000, 8 to 10,000 cases a year, I actually couldn't handle all of them by myself. In any case that involves serious abuses like this, I make myself available personally to the survivors. Not the prosecutor I was assigned to, I made myself available. If there was a resolution or an outcome to the case that went against the wishes of survivors, that was another reason that I sat right there with those survivors to hear directly from them, to tell them what the evidence was, why we were doing what we were doing. And what I discovered is that oftentimes there was a nuance that an investigation may not find, that you all, our respective survivors, will see. And that was another reason that I wanted to sit down and look these individuals in the eye so that we can have this conversation and help us make the best decision in search for justice. And so I'm gonna ask a couple quick questions, and I'm very mindful of time. This is why I got a former prosecutor out to ask this question. The crime victims' rights of these guys specifically to guarantee survivors. Let's never say in federal city. You went to court to enforce that in your experience with that Congress.
that promise was never tested. It was during the federal investigation. See, and that's why it was so wishy-washy, is because Alex the cop that had the federal investigation. So the feds were coming to me and asking me questions, but then he took the feds passed it back down to the state. So it was just all very confusing. When the feds came to me and told me that there was a state sentence, I was like, oh, wow, that's great. I just think that the Jew with the ongoing federal, because it's a federal. You all know you could, but to be something, they have that like to go to jail. So it's just all very wishy-washy, but no, and that the crime victims' rights acts never applied.
Ms. Jones, you've been fighting for justice for a long time, longer than anyone should have to. What has that fight cost you? And what keeps you?
I'm a mother of 4 children, so that is why I'm fighting. And I would speak very loud to protect my children, and not just my children, everybody's children. That's all I can do. I think that's very big toll on you. When you look at the innocence in a child's face, if your child should ever have to go through what we've been through.
And as many years as I've sat across the meeting from survivors, I can't pretend to fully understand the courage it takes to walk in to a room like this one, to tell the truth about this to you in front of cameras, in front of strangers, engage you directly with a system that has let you down. And as Rosa, you said that I'm trying to figure out what justice looks like. Good luck. And yes, we have a lot of work that we have to do to figure that out. What that will look like, then there's a lot that this investigation needs to do just that. And so what I can say with certainty is that what the inspiration for this work looks like, and I'm looking at all of you. I'm looking at every single survivor, known and unknown, that continues to inspire us to do this work. And I thank you for being here. You do not take that lightly, that you've agreed to be here today and share your stories and being honest about lying to others. Because, as my colleague said, this administration has made it harder, not easier to be here, but you are our inspiration. And we appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you, Congressman. Next up is Spooky Everton. Thank you to Survivor for making it today. Ms. Wild, Mr. Spensky, Rosa, Mr. Roberts, and brothers. Your testimonies are powerful and extremely heart-wrenching. And we're sitting right now at 2.8 miles from the Epstein estate, but so much of this took place 4 miles from Mar-a-Lago, where Jeffrey Epstein spent some of his time. And I don't think it's lost on any of us up here how much courage you all were showing you being here today and sharing your stories, because as we end up unraveling threads of the Epstein files, you're seeing just how broad and deep this conspiracy goes. And none of you talked about the threats you face, and that must be incredibly frightening. Many of the world's richest and most powerful men are convicted, and they have directly perpetrated a decades-long cover-up. Even after we were able to pass the Epstein Conspiracy Act, over the remaining objections I had, President Trump, then Attorney General Pam Bondi, and Speaker Mike Johnson, the rich and powerful were still able to pervert justice, with the DOJ refusing to turn over 50% of the documents in their possession, redacting the names of the perpetrators while releasing personal information about many of you, re-victimizing the survivors. And that's outrageous. And we damn sure need to ask Pam Bondi what the hell happened here and why she chose to re-victimize survivors when she appears before us next week. Mr. First, I want to start with you real quickly. Are you aware of any instance where the DOJ contacted survivors before it released personal identifying information about the survivors last year?
The DOJ did not contact survivors directly, but we at World Without Exploitation did reach out to DOJ.
Okay, not
They did return a phone call, But when we ask them to speak with survivors, that never happened.
And that's outrageous because the DOJ is supposed to represent justice for people who are victims of crime, not re-victimizing them, not protecting the perpetrators of crime. And let's at stake today for you all and the hundreds of other women who are trafficked and abused by Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and their associates. It is justice for you, but also the idea that there's one rule of law for everything. That we don't have one set of rules for the rich and powerful, the absolute elite, another that applies to the rest of us. As I've said before, I spent my career fighting for the rule of law. It's very important to me. I also started my career at the Securities and Exchange Commission, prosecuting corporate fraud, then top banking law, like you see here about it. And I also know that following the money is the first rule of tracking down any kind of major criminal conspiracy. And as I just want to reiterate the points that were made earlier by Repetition Murphy, by you, Ms. Roberts, that we need to follow the money today. FC survivors have sued and won settlements from a number of large financial institutions, including Bank of America, JP Morgan, and Deutsche Bank, hundreds of millions of dollars. We need to get the SARS reports from Treasury. We need the SEC, Treasury, and the banking regulators to investigate and potentially prosecute anyone or any institution that was implicit in covering up or helping facilitate the Epstein trafficking ring. Now, Mr. Kubin, you've stated previously that Epstein would never have been able to get away with this horrendous crimes without the investigative banks, the big banks, and exactly 2020 being stated. I've always said that you'll never be able to molest these young girls without the banks and the money behind it. Could you briefly elaborate on what you meant when you said that?
Correct. So we found during our original litigation that at the inception that he was pulling out large amounts of cash and transferring funds back and forth, and large amounts of cash were coming out of banks. There were never any questions that were being asked at the time. And in fact, as I've noted to before, even back in 2003, he had envelopes filled with cash that either reported to police that had been stolen from stolen. And the banks appeared to be working with him, not questioning him, because of all the money he was moving through those institutions.
It is now shame that the Department of Justice and the FBI have never followed this thread. Something that is very, very important. I will just add that the House of Democrats have worked with Chairman Fulmer. They issued subpoenas for Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan, but seeking subpoenas for an additional 21 banks. I think this is going to be really, really important. Another important piece of evidence that has not been followed up on is the camera evidence, the computer classes. The lead attorney at the time, Maria Villafina, that referred to. Now, you had mentioned this, Rubin, that you saw a number of cameras in the estate. That essentially have a lot of damning footage. Can you describe what cameras you saw and how many, where they were located in the estate?
Right. So after we originally filed the first days here in Palm Beach for one of the victims, I was granted the opportunity by the court to go on property at Epstein's home and do a site inspection. There were spots within the home, both in the bedrooms and the massage area and other areas of the home, where you could see mounting brackets where cameras used to be, and that there was CPU or computer units that were taken away. And that I was able to verify back in 2003, as I said, that Sarah Cowell had actually shown internal footage to the police department back then of someone that was allegedly taking money. So there was verifiable evidence that cameras were in fact in the home. Lastly, I represented a client in Manhattan, who she was brought to the home and Manhattan saw the entire network of cameras that was being utilized in the Manhattan mansion. None of that did released.
And it said, lead attorney of explicit with Maria Villafina that said that was a smoking gun as evidence. They knew exactly where it was. Now it's a cost that folks then the U.S. attorney, but the District of Florida refused to investigate this or actually seek it. I just turned them up. Thank you all again. Thank you for your courage. Thank you, Congressman. Next is Representative Bryan.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and thank you to each of you for being here today. I especially want to thank those of you who shared your stories about surviving unimaginable abuse. Thank you for your immense bravery, which we do over and over again, but also for your willingness to relive your trauma in pursuit of justice. I know you waited far too long and are still waiting. But from the bottom of my heart, please know that you are seen and heard by every member of Congress in this room. And we will make sure that your stories are not ignored. Former Attorney General Bonnie literally kept her back, turned away from full of survivors we see in the photo. We are here to do the opposite. We are here to walk alongside you, to shine a light on the stories that you have shared. We'll keep fighting for truth, for transparency, and an end to this shameless DOJ cover up of all the information relating to the heinous crimes of this Epstein case. DOJ's document productions to date have released very little new information about Epstein's co-conspirators. In fact, we know that there are 2.5 billion documents still hidden. But unfortunately, as we have heard today, recent releases have exposed private and personal identifying information of survivors. DOJ has created serious risks to safety for survivors, published names and photographs, some of them very explicit. Survivors have also shared with the committee that in multiple instances, as we heard again today, loved ones didn't know that you had been abused by Epstein until that information was released publicly. Every oversight Democrat sent Pam Bondi a letter back in February to express alarm at DOJ for publishing survivor names and photographs thousands of times, while taking special care to redact information that would be crucial for bringing justice and holding perpetrators of abuse accountable. The sheer amount of personal identifiable information released after survivors got assurances from DOJ that they would be protected raises the question of whether this is just incompetence or far more likely deliberate witness intimidation. Ms. Bensky, you have spoken on the harm of DOJ's sloppy Epstein files that has caused you and other survivors who spoke about your own name being released despite repeated requests to redact it. Will you share for us, for the record, what that experience meant to you and other survivors to have your information be exposed?
Yeah, I'm in public. That's the choice that I made. I've never been like, did I expect anybody to be in the details of abuse? To me, it's always been about protecting others. And I don't know. Yeah, unfortunately, I had friends in the story, and to see somebody's name out there who have worked so hard to move past yesterday, it's something. It's kind of like for your body. It's you like reading your own name in the file. That's just like doing the files and taking out have to look pretty hard to find names, but your last name is the next thing to bring. And it's like there's like a hot flash moment, right? It hits you, starts like a bullet to the chest where you're like, oh my God, it's got feeling of like a PTSD is real, right? So the PTSD the trauma dying its door definitely came back, and then you're reading on, and then you see more, and you see survivors being outed, a survivor that I have said, don't ever murder you always been a Jake now. So and to feel the attack of that is something that I would give it to her.
I'm sorry. I feel like you deserve an apology from your government. And, as Democratic members of Congress, we are here to continue to work with you. But I also know that we absolutely have to fight for better. We have to fight to pass Virginia's law. And Congressman Frankel wanted us to share that she's also been working on the 40-mile Enforcing Crime Victims' Rights Act to ensure that those rights that you are owed are actually upheld, that we work with survivors to inform you about any prosecutorial agreements, to ensure that folks know what rights you are awarded and deserved. And we will continue to investigate, to fight for all of you, but also for every survivor and every young person who is being victimized throughout the
Thank you, Nominated. Representative Ansari.
Thank you, Ranking Member. President from former Attorney General Pam Bondi, Senior Attorney General Lev Parnas, for transparency regarding the Epstein files.
It is instead led the most egregious cover-up in American history. Despite their cumulative occurrences, Pam Bondi released Epstein files at an excruciatingly slow pace, and what she did, and we've heard powerful testimony today, protected the names of rich and powerful men who committed the crimes while revealing the identities of survivors. In March of 2026, the DOJ admitted that it withheld almost 48,000 files from public release, including allegations against President Trump. The Trump-Epstein administration continues to try to cover that to this day. President Trump has said most recently that we should stop wasting time and energy on the Epstein file. He's called the release of the files and transparency, and I quote, a hoax. Abuse and trafficking of thousands of minors is not a hoax. Abuse and sexual exploitation of women is not a hoax. Survivors deserve the truth, and the American public deserves the truth. Ms. Jones, you have said that you, and I quote, put your hope in President Donald Trump, and that you believe that he would do right by survivors. Now, do you believe that he has broken his promise? It's broken with many promises. Thank you. I want to remind everyone that former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene alleges that during a phone call, President Trump told her that if he was to release the Epstein files, and I quote, my friends are going to get first. And now the Trump Department of Justice that is responsible for overseeing the release of the Epstein files claims that there is nothing more to investigate in the Epstein case. Todd Blanche connected the late Maxwell, Epstein's accomplice, before moving her to a cushy minimal security prison. It is so ridiculous and insulting. So far, only Epstein and Maxwell have been prosecuted for sex trafficking, and there has never been a full accounting of Epstein's financial crimes or additional prosecutions of suspected co-conspirators. Last month, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche said, and I quote, from the information that we have within the Epstein files, we do not have a case against anybody. Ms. Jones, based on your experience or based on what you have seen in the files, do you believe the statement to be true? Absolutely not. Ms. Banksy, based on your own experiences or what you have seen in the files, do you believe the statement to be true? Ms. Wild, I'd like to ask you the same question. No. And Rosa, lastly, I'd like to ask you the same. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman. I'd like to now thank Representative Lodge.
Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you all for being here. Walking into this room and telling your stories again takes tremendous courage. And I've heard a lot of the stories from survivors, like everybody was struck by courage to justice for Epstein, Maxwell, and everyone involved in these crimes. But I'm most struck by your commitment to every child, every potential victim of something that's being solved. Epstein, Maxwell, and their co-conspirators scattered lives. They targeted vulnerable women and girls, objectifying and attempting to silence them. They were protected by their wealth, their power, their privilege. You can see it here in Palm Beach. And as we've heard today, their ability to commit these crimes reflects a systemic and intentional failure by the very institutions meant to protect you. Our government lets you down when you deserve protection, justice for the crimes that were committed against you. And we're here today to try to do our part to correct some of these failures. We're not going to stop until the truth comes out, the extent of the crimes, the involvement of all of the co-conspirators is revealed. I want to focus on two patterns that emerged today. First, Epstein and Maxwell weaponizing immigration status and travel documents against survivors, confiscating passports, holding visas hostage to track women and girls in their orbit. And then when survivors like yourselves are brave enough to speak up, our justice system ignoring you, reinforcing the sense that there was nowhere to say guilty to charge.
Rosa, Swile, thank you for being here today on this just a whole bunch of these patterns. Rosa, can you tell us again how Epstein used your visa status as a leverage to keep you under his control?
One visa is a visa for an individual with extraordinary abilities, and it takes a lot of documents to obtain that visa. I have helped one individual to obtain similar visa, and I learned the amount of documents needing to be added. Looking back at my case now, I did not have just like documents to obtain that visa. I am 100% sure of that. My agency didn't be able to obtain that visa for me in such a short time, which was less than 6 months. It's a miracle. You would try to do that right now, you won't be able to. I want to know how, and it's impossible. So I knew that my visa was linked to him, and if he is at least, I will be spent that.
And are you aware of Epstein using similar tactics? Something
I have personally met a foreigner girl that he's mentioned in West Palm Beach. And I have personally had not seen the foreigner come forward to tell the story. And I hope my case will bring more people up from, because there are many other people who speak broken English or don't speak English at all who can tell the stories.
just while you were 14 as you testified when you first encountered description. So you
Yes,
child.
yes.
I just want to go back to the DOJ investigation and our deal for Epstein and ask you, were you told by the Department of Justice that your case was still being investigated even after Allison Costa signed off on Epstein's plea deal?
Yes, they sent me the piece of paper in the mail. I didn't always have it. That saying that he's going to be, maybe process and that, they were doing it good, to put him away. But at that time, the letter was, dated and that already been signed.
You learned later that they had already signed with you. So that letter they sent you was lied. They lied to you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both. Feel bad. Thank you, Congressman. Next up is your Governor Russell.
Thank you, Mom. So we lost Brian Below, educator Frankie Pepper, Garcia, coach on some of the your efforts that made today possible, of course. Thanks to our courageous survivors. I've been maybe since I was a freshman in a bunch of clinics. The great Elijah Cummings, our chair at the time, we often remind us that the role of the Committee of Oversight, our mandate, is to be an efficient and effective pursuit of the truth. Now, that pursuit is what worries House Democrats here today. Because instead of Epstein's victims being met with deficiency, they've been met with obstruction and delays by law enforcement and by the Department of Justice. Instead of Epstein's victims being met with effectiveness, they've been met with systemic cover and cowardice of those who were intimidated by the power and the privilege of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and their co-conspirators. So today, we're here to shine light, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. We are here to shine light on the corruption, on the failures of this investigation. But most of all, we are here to center the survivors, to center the courageous. Survivors who are from women before you let go your children. Children whose innocence was corrupted, whose bodies were violated, whose dreams were destroyed, whose lives were irrevocably changed. Maria, Courtney, Janelisa, Danny, Rosa, Skyler, and in Virginia. We thank you. Congress enacted the Crime Victims' Rights Act in 2004 to mandate specific obligation for the Department of Justice to ensure that survivors are protected, informed, and able to appeal. Mr. Clooney, you've spent decades representing survivors and fighting for transparency around its handling of their cases. Can you speak to how the federal government violated after their bodies were violated, after their dreams, their dignity, their lives were violated? How were their rights violated?
It was already stiffening after the release of documents, and we were looking at this while here at the end in her case that was brought as a final disclosure of all those documents. It showed that the federal government and the state attorney's office colluded together to not bring the indictment because they knew that if they did, that in the Crime Victims' Rights Act would then be triggered, and they would have to inform the victims of what they would do. So what we learned was they intentionally kept it out of the hands of victims so that the victims couldn't object or have any say in the process by secretly doing this deal that they did. And the federal judge, the great federal judge Mara, found that there was a violation of the act here in the Southern District. And unfortunately, because of like the law was written, there was absolutely no way to get any justice or any remedy as a result.
That's right. So they weren't notified, they were not installed, they were not given the opportunity to participate in proceedings, that your rights and effectively lives. These rights are supposed to be guaranteed by the Crime Victims' Rights Act. Now, I'd like to speak to the execs to share about how federal government can order for you to take your case. I see the clock on ticking here. Anyone else like to speak to that? How about this? Let me just say, since survivor messed up, I know that this is not only not that your safety, that you were robbed of your innocence and your dreams. Survivors are also forced to carry the financial burden of abuse. Lost wages, housing instability, medical expenses, legal fees, security costs, trying to that impacts your daily life. Can you even speak to that?
We have put ourselves on the front line and spoke out in the biggest one that we should have done times to don't. And that is what educators are told. Now, every job that we are on board, they know us. They know our most personal information of things that happen to us as children. That is forever going to blah, blah, blah. We don't get that back. We don't get that luxury. So that is just one of the most important things that comes with the lead of this. All of it. Becoming to be to their father. Yes, like I heard this one person still on the roof. I'm a really cool person that you meet me outside of here. I have a life story. These these are documents mailed to something else. And I can do daily tasks without certain help. And I have this support system and I'm grateful for it. But if I didn't, I don't think I would be here today. So it's really hard. I want to tell the world like it's hard to be here today. I'm very uncomfortable. I'm trying to look like I'm okay, but I'm not okay.
It's anyone else like to speak to financial burden, these lost wages, house instability, mental expenses, legal fees, security costs?
So I was in that when I was in the one night we met, I used to Jeffrey, I experienced a lot of all and so I think I understood your question, but I'm not saying anything. Yes, ma'am. I was just gonna say that just like people walking over the bridge, 14-year-old going to Palm Beach, it's like as soon as you go over that bridge, you just feel the money and power. And it's just such a contrast. If you go down to Okeechobee, and the turnpike, there's a road called Drexel, and it's a mobile Christian club. That's where I came. That's where I was from. So to go from here to there,
it's just, you know, it's so confusing at his homeless. My parents had addiction problems. You know, he prayed. It was all very complicated, you know, and then later on, the fact that he used those things against me, he had defendants pulling up our MySpace pages, treating us like criminals because you're at a party at 16 and 17 and drinking, you know, rather than going out. They had. So for me, it's just it's so sad that she's fucking him who he's pregnant on. He's pregnant on for y'all, especially in Palm Beach County. He's pregnant on his kids who came from trouble background and everything else, and they betrayed us as these underage prostitutes. Which is that a real charge? Go to claim what this is a statute number. If I'm on his charge, that's so expensive.
It was bizarre to possibly at the time, but it made absolutely no sense. And the statutory guidance would be very questionable because the bill minded. But speaking to representatives' question specifically representing survivors of the last 30 years ago, it affects not just the survivor, it affects their family, it affects the way they raise their own children if they have daughters. It affects their mental stability and ability to maintain employment. Try and tell a survivor they've got to pay a lawyer for 20 years straight to get justice. It's impossible, especially the law that doesn't provide any remedy. So they've got to seek out victims advocates that are willing to do it for free. And there are many of them, especially enough that want to do it for 20 plus years to fight. So financial implications of being a victim, especially with somebody with limited resources, is dramatic.
Yeah, I think also it's in this fight. Like, we're have to crack down. And this isn't the only thing I'm sure we're all doing this week to talk about getting resuscitated out. Advocacy is expensive. Therapy is expensive. Yeah, they're no guys. Because honestly, we got to it for our kids. We got no one to make it. So, yeah. And I'll just put that was one sort of point. So, according to your question about these prostitution charges, we need to eliminate the prostitution charges from the books altogether. We absolutely should be holding sex buyers accountable for the harm they cause, but people in prostitution should not be criminalized for being in prostitution because the vast majority of that are not there by choice. They're there because of lack of circumstances, poverty, other vulnerabilities. And what we see so often is that traffickers deliberately use that notion that the women and girls will be arrested for prostitution as a tactic. It is the number one tactic in order to make sure that survivors and victims are too terrified and too traumatized to talk. So we've got a lot of work to do.
And I just want to thank you all. I think we prescriptive with a number of the legislative responses to address these systemic harms. I'll just say that there is no amount of compensation that never fully account for what was stolen. But every single survivor certainly deserves much more than sympathy. And that's the work that I'm committed to do alongside every legislatively. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'll turn it over now to Representative Freeze.
Thank you again for the gift. I believe it's about a point that you and I met many years ago. And just to let you know, I took for heart what you said. And myself and colleagues, Democratic Justice Office, has filed a bill many years in a row, negative EU, to make sure we can get these rights that you talked about. And the Courtney Wyman bill, we assert that the victims of federal crimes are entitled to all the rights guaranteed under the original Crime and Rights Act, regardless of if the charges are filed before. And then it lists out a whole set of criteria. So I want to thank you for your bravery. We're still trying to get that bill passed. It's a little difficult under the circumstances, but we're going to keep trying. And that was so much. Yeah. Now, I'm going to tell you, but I don't think I was able to tell you exactly why it took so long to have this hearing in Orange County. Because I think many of us always believe there are three witnesses who have been missing. We must be asked the question, why did Jeffrey Epstein get the deal that he got? And why were the survivors so mistreated in the grand jury room? And those people are Valerie Fisher, who was the state attorney, Lana Levitt. I don't know if I'm saying that name right. She was one of the prosecutors at that grand jury, and Mary Dugan, who was one of the prosecutors. I've been questioned for many years that those people be subpoenaed. We only had an opportunity. In 2019, Karen Maloney was the chair of our oversight committee. The Democrats were in charge. We actually scheduled to have this hearing here. And what happened was the Justice Department had engaged the Maxwell prosecution and not going to know, but it just she was just as the cop. So and that is correct, actually. So that's what happened. Political circumstances change. But we need to get to the bottom of this. Now, really, my next question to me was to give me thank you so much for holding down in the justice system. Can you give us any insight opinion why these charges were so watered down? Was it Pat? Was it attorneys? Was the state attorney? Yeah, let's start with that admission. Because he could have stopped the right way, right? Could have stopped the right way. Was he overpowered? Did he sweet talk? What happens?
I think all of the above. Unfortunately, the system is political here, and he was an elected representative. After the White House season to police and the investigation began, we saw a full arrest, meaning that Epstein hired his lawyer from identity for Black. He hired Dershowitz, he hired his Lefkowitz in New York, and they all swarmed into Orange County. And they that very quickly with all kinds of information details was just to smear the victims. They all liars, they all were young, prostitutes, or they stated that for MySpace pages, it's girls. And then they were talking about the parade of horribles that could happen to them. And they were doing this in history, unfortunately, in this county, many may forget it, that this they failed prosecution of the race here in Palm Beach County from the board of the MHS. And that was a huge publicity but in taking that on a political basis. And I know that the Christian was aware of that. And I think he saw his career going up in flames if he would have prosecuted these. So I think he needs working for an account. And as a result, I think that's why he takes the praise of information.
What about an excuse? I think perhaps it was, we should have gone up in families, really. Pretty personalities were advocates. I would suggest not only did the lawyers put pressure on it, but others doing about many phone calls. Is that correct? And a lot of into that.
We have them down that a number of phone calls were made politically. In fact, she fired the son who I spoke with, and sworn deposition testimony stated that he, in fact, was so concerned that he asked Mr. Cockpit directly is he would protect him for.
So, yes, you mentioned Chief Ryder, because I think it's always good to identify the big guys. And Chief Ryder, who originally brought this case, was tall with what she was doing on there. And ironically, he ended up taking the case to the U.S. attorney, who didn't do much of it. What happened there with the same type of record?
Yeah, there was even higher pressure at that point because then we had started that involved as well. Understands totally all of that from history. And there were huge amounts of political pressure that the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Southern District at that time. But also the Chief Ryder fought with advice, and he was so angry that the Christian wrote scathing letter that's in the record now to him, just astounding that the failure of his office to prosecute his claims. And they were looking at the U.S. Attorney's Office to save the case. And unfortunately, they were just appalled with what they did as well.
One more comment, which is to really salute the power of the press. Because of this Miami Herald article in November 2018 called for version of justice that finally really started to bring a lot of it to light. And then it was each post going to court to get the grand jury proceedings of Palm County and Company, and that was in a couple of years later. So we thank them allowing the company back to the just to say again, thank you so much to the survivors who listen to. So if you are an inspiration of courage and perseverance and give us really the intuition to continue to this fight. And again, let's make sure that we subpoena and have all the relevant agencies testify, and we find out who else should be accountable. Because Jeffrey Epstein did not have to lower it. And with that, thank you so much for helping us here in Angel.
Thank you. Big Representative, I want to get just to close us out. I want to thank first and foremost Representative Frankel for hosting us today. This would not have been possible without her leadership, her team, her insistence on why on each Palm County was still for investigation. And of course, I want to thank Mayor James and his team for the support in putting this here again. Most importantly, I want to thank survivors that are here and the witnesses. Your testimony on the record is so important. I know so many people have to speak out, but having your stories and your answers in the record is really important to our investigation and what it's paid for to encourage you. I also just want for the public to understand that for those of us on the committee, we are focused on truth, accountability, and justice. Clearly, Palm Beach, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the prosecutors that were involved in this case, law enforcement officials, these are all the individuals that we have a lot of questions. For us to really move this investigation forward, we need to understand why the prosecutors that went forward to the U.S. Attorney, to other courts, and demanded and asked for the prosecutions, asked for an action to be taken, why those were denied. We have yet to get responses from out of prosecutors. We have additional questions for the former Legal Secretary, and we certainly have numerous questions for the line of prosecutors that were involved in making those recommendations. Palm Beach County will continue to be an important place for our investigation and continue to explore and investigate the links between what's happening at Mar-a-Lago and Fort Epstein. To close, we'll say a recording hearing from Attorney General Bondi here in 2 weeks, and we'll continue to ask the majority, the Department of us with additional subpoenas as this investigation moves forward and in order to protect the survivors. And with that, I think we to lost our witnesses and speaking.
Thanks. Am I good? No, when I keep what's your parts. Yeah. You gotta keep going. Yes, sir. You're fighting to keep the pressure on. That's our promoter. No, it's far from over certain. That's one of the reasons I'm running for Congress. It says they're yes, sir. I can tell. Yeah. Hey, good to see you. Good to see you. Nice to see you in person. Really incredible. Yeah, amazing. Maybe we could set something up for. He's not going to talk to me now. No. Yeah, maybe in the future. Yeah, I think you're also empowered by the gun. We're not going to go. Absolutely. How you doing? Good? Yeah, but good. Are you running or something that I see? Congress. Yeah. Something's busted. Absolutely. Survivors Exchange.
No. Nothing. It helped me. Nothing. They all started. I don't know. It's really hard. Why if the guess